Hello, students. This is our 5th episode, and we're delving into Hanyang University 2017 수시 글로벌 인재 어학기자 전형, and this is 모의 essay 1차, so the early part of 2017. So once again, keep in mind that 모의 면접 is always a lot easier than the actual exam. Don't underestimate this. Don't underestimate Hanyang University, their essay track, because the essay topics you're actually going to get are quite harder than this. But 모의 면접, you should still do it because it offers you a great insights about what the format is and what you're being graded upon. Anyway, so Eddy, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so you briefly read all three. What do you think about it?
This is really overall picture of what Hanyang University requires you.
Right.
How your essay should be formatted, how you should approach your essay topic. So I think this is a really good opportunity to see if you're approaching or if you're applying to Hanyang University. This is a really great opportunity to get some insights.
Of course, it offers you everything from a sample question to grading schemes, grading criteria, everything. Now, what's the most important about Hanyang University is understanding the passage as well, because you will get points on that. You know, you need to get a good read out of everything and be able to summarize the main points about it. So let's jump right in. Passage A. I think a lot of world's problems come from the fact that we are poor at framing things against other things. There are multiple items for this, such as a micro versus macro view of the world. The micro view is the big picture way to look at things. This type of thinking is ideal for setting your goals and creating a long-term plan to acquire them. It is a mindset that will give you a continuing sense of perspective. The micro view, on the contrary, is focused on the specific details of the task at hand. You have already identified your big goals. So here you are breaking big goals apart, separating them into manageable pieces, and identifying the individual skills that are required. This is the type of mindset that you can use as you approach your daily routine. Quite simple, don't you think?
Yeah.
And
simple.
Just giving you, I guess, introducing the idea of what micro and macro view. Macro is the big picture way, and micro, on the contrary, specific details of the task at hand.
Yeah.
And if you break your life apart in micro view, while you still look at your life as a whole in macro view, you might do quite well.
Yeah.
They say. All right. So passage B. Economic theory developed considerably between the appearance of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and the Great Depression, but there was no separation into microeconomics and macroeconomics. Economists implicitly assumed either that markets were in equilibrium or that in the event of a transient shock, markets would quickly return to equilibrium. The severe and prolonged global collapse in economic activity that occurred during the Great Depression changed that. It was not that economists were unaware that aggregate variables will be unstable. They studied business cycles. The economics profession has thus had essentially two theoretical systems, one to explain the small picture, the other to explain the big picture. Following the approach of physics, for the past quarter century or so, a number of economists have made sustained efforts to merge microeconomics and macroeconomics. They have tried to develop microeconomic foundations for macroeconomic models on the grounds that valid economic analysis must begin with the behavior of the elements of microeconomic analysis. Individual households and firms that seek to optimize their conditions. There have also been attempts to use very fast computers to simulate the behavior of economic aggregates by summing the behavior of large numbers of households and firms. It is too early to say anything about the likely outcome of this effort, but within the field of macroeconomics, there is continuing progress in improving models, whose deficiencies were exposed by the instabilities that occurred in world markets during the global financial crisis that began in 2008. Wow. This is a mouthful passage. It intrigued me immediately, right away, that Adam Smith never talked about microeconomics and macroeconomics.
No, he didn't.
When did that all start?
In Great Depression.
Great Depression?
Yeah.
Why would that cause it?
Because Great Depression is a phenomenon that some economists failed to look at things right.
Okay.
So it broke the glass of looking at things in one way. So this passage doesn't really talk about microeconomics or macroeconomics, but this passage says Great Depression is a symbol that we should look at things in both ways, macro and macro, because we failed before, so let's not do that mistake again.
But we do that time and time again, right?
Yeah.
Market failed in America in the 20s, from mid 1910s to 20s, and then it failed through different wars. I think there would have been other economic crises, but then war sort of covered it, right? World War I and II, and Vietnam War. And then we Korea had our economic collapse in 98.
Yeah.
And then America also had it in 2008.
Yeah.
So
IMF.
Isn't it safe to say that economic failure or depression, recession, these things are inevitable?
I'll put it depends on how you approach things. So there is no correct answer I personally think that there is no correct answer in math if you have reasonable equation that mapped out to support your answer.
Right.
But this case, this economic crisis, doesn't have really clear answer. Oh, this is the way that you should approach this problem, or this is the way that you should think about this, or all that. I think it's really making a wise choice is the biggest part of saving it or going down a slippery slope.
Right.
So
you agree to the passage saying that we should look at both ways, not
just one way.
On...
Yeah, like how contrast, and there's one passage from TOEFL how if you put too much color on one part,
right,
it doesn't shine. But if you put several colors like this decoration, like green, red, it shines out all the colors.
Because
like green,
contrast,
contrast. So instead of focusing on too much on one side, how ship will sunk if too much people on one side, it will sunk. So it will sink. And this is the way of looking at things too. If you focus too much on macro way, so you might miss very important details that will essentially need for your problem or to save it or to change things, to flip it. So, yeah.
Here in the passage, it says, a number of economists have made sustained efforts to merge microeconomics and macroeconomics. What would be some of the example of that?
So, this, I would put an example of, let's say, eMart. So, how eMart sometimes host a survey for consumers to collect big data from their customers. So they will host questions like, oh, what are you here for? Or what products do you usually look for? Or what kind of products do you usually look for? Or what brand do you prefer? Or what should be displayed at the front desk?
Right, I have that experience. I was waiting to check out, right? I had all these groceries and it was in the evening, so there's a long line. Yeah. And while I was waiting, a lady approached and asked me for a survey, and they said, you're going to wait anyway. Yeah. Right? If you do this survey, I'll give you, 5,000 won coupon.
Yeah. Or Starbucks gift cards.
Yeah. And I ended up doing it. So how is that micro and macro at the same time?
Because you're also focusing on customers' need, but you're also looking at the big picture of large data. So you're not only collecting from you. They're not only collecting from you. They're also collecting from a guy behind you, or they're also collecting data from customer in Seoul or Daegu, Busan. So they're also looking at big picture of worldwide, not worldwide, countrywide, nationwide, of what customer usually look for, or to see what they should do to benefit or to satisfy their customers when they visit eMart. But they're also looking at what each customer are looking for. So looking at each customer and collecting large data of each customer's opinion.
So is it a lie when they say that your individualized information will not get in here? Or are they looking at or for eMart's view, a micro-way would be one store. Is it better to say that?
No. Microwave is just one store in Daegu probably. Yeah.
So they would. So
Yeah.
when I say individualized information isn't person to person, it's more like store to store.
Yeah.
And then macro way for them is to see the entire store,
Entire store.
the chain.
Yeah. Chain.
Okay,
More
that changed. That does change things in perspectives.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think my example here is Google. I know Google's been supplying Google Books, those $25, $100 laptops to school students. Basically almost free. And with it, all they require is they, make their emails, email accounts on Google, right?
Yeah.
Or a Google Book. So it will only work if you have Google account, right?
Yeah.
To log in. And I think they say that's the future of the classroom, right? Kids come in and each get their own Google Book.
Yeah, ebook. Yeah,
right?
Google
And
Books. Yeah.
it doesn't have to be yours, or it doesn't have to be. You could use the computer that your friend used because when you log in, it refreshes, right?
Oh.
And then you get in and it has everything. It has Microsoft Word or Google Word doc and PowerPoints and everything basically you need.
Wow.
And you can save all the documents to Google Drive. It's amazing.
School changed a lot.
Right. But then in the process of it, Google gets to collect all the data. Like, for instance, I tell my students that they get to use Instagram for free. They get to use Facebook for free. But none of it is actually free because in exchange, you're giving away your personal information. And in exchange, you are allowing Facebook to show you the advertisements that they sell to the companies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in this case, towards all these people, all these students that Google are offering their free laptops to, and therefore signing up their Google email to, they don't really read essays or they don't really read emails, but they use every word in all of their users' email as a search word, right? Okay. So they'll say, okay, so we're going to look for a Starburst candy, right? We're going to look for students who are interested in having Starburst candy. Which state has the highest, demands for pineapple? Which state has more strawberry? And I remember as a kid, these fruit candies. We call it maichu in Korea.
Maichu. Maigumi.
Right. And if I like strawberry and it's supposed to have one strawberry, one orange, one lemon, and one pineapple and whatever. And if you happen to find two strawberries, you feel lucky. Right? And you might do that you're able to do that. And Google might be the only company in America who can say that they have the data over the entire national sixth graders on who like the Starburst candy, right? Yeah. Who likes to sit on specific things, and they can search. Sixth graders search. I guess my reference is kind of old, but Miley Cyrus or Eminem. I'm old, guys.
Eminem.
Yeah.
Wow. They're legends, though.
Kendrick Lamar is Kendrick Lamar.
He's still alive. He's good.
I remember.
Why don't you say Tupac and Biggie?
Well, anyway. I remember. Anyway, so Google might be the only people who could say that we have information of these guys, right? Yeah. So here. When Google provides all these information or provides laptops, they collect macro information of every student
who's using ebooks.
Right.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I think they get to serve these macro information in a micro way. Yeah. But once again, we're living in a global society, so no longer micro is about each household or each family. It's more like cities and states. Because Google or Amazon, they're gonna think state level and even government level, right? For Amazon, Korea might be an equivalent to a state, not an entirety of a nation. Though there are a lot of people living here, right? Yeah. So they're gonna say, okay, should we sell to Korea? Should we sell to Japan? Should we sell to do this? How should we make it interesting for this and that country? And that's still micro, though to us, it's macro. Yeah. So I think there are ways to serve micro and macro together, because my Google account, and I talked about this with Tom before. When I log into my Google, it will show me the news articles that I'm interested in and political affiliations that I'm supporting towards, right? So that's serving my microeconomic needs in a way, my micro environment, my microclimate, my micro political climate. But then Google could also use that information to control the macro and see the changing trends of the macro in a macroeconomic sense.
Yeah.
I'll say.
Yeah.
You also mentioned briefly before we shoot this video what Apple is doing.
Oh, so this is another example of Apple focusing on macro and micro. So how Apple iPhones are made in Edge used to be made in maybe in Curve, but usually Apple also hosts a survey to ask customers, what do you like, how iPhones should be designed? I like Edge curve, or I like curved, that narrow design.
Right. You want the pointy
edges.
edges.
The pointy
and
edges or
edges.
curve edges, because to ask customers what do you want, and the survey shows 80% of people, I like curve edge because it's easy to hold, it's really nice looking and great design. And some people, 20% of people say, I like edge design because it is their personal viewpoint is, I like that design better than curve. So, but Apple tend to make their iPhone in curve because they want to focus on the bigger side of their customer instead of focusing on 20% side. They rather focus on 80% side because 80% side is big. It's a large number of data. It's actually
right because the 20% of the entire world.
And 80% of world.
And they should still be able to serve that 20% if that 20% is solely in Asia. Right? Yeah. And they might say only in Japan you'll find green iPhone. For whatever reason. And
so that's
they say next year, 2019, is a very auspicious a year of the pig, like the year of the golden pig.
Okay.
So maybe Apple will launch a special golden
wow. I should get
Apple, gold Apple phone.
Just limited edition. I should get that too.
Okay. Well, but one thing to note here is when people talk about micro and macro, they think about, or how did you learn in an economics class?
Economics class.
Micro is household and macro is government?
Yeah. Macro is, so my professor actually explained, so if you want to save one company, so let's say if Samsung is about to bankrupt, but it will not happen. But if the Korean government wants to save one country, it's a micro way of approaching Samsung to save it. But if you want to develop or improve Korea's economy as a whole, so everybody lives well and everybody's happy, it is really macro way of approaching things is right to do. So yeah, that's what I learned in economics class. So
macro, but in a I guess textbook definition, micro is more of a individualized household. But then in a global society, that definition should also change because I don't think once again Amazon and Google will look at each household as as a customer. They look at more in terms of towns and cities or even state.
Yeah, state. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But at the end of passage B, it does say it had deficiencies were exposed by the instabilities that occurred in the world markets during the global financial crisis that began in 2008. So whether it is correct or incorrect, if you solely look at the world in just one sort of view, it will fail.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that was the example that they tied into macro. All right. Now, C, this is about something different, close reading. When you read a novel or poem, how do you analyze it? For most students and teachers, understanding literature involves close reading. Close reading is done by carefully reading and reflecting on a piece of literature, be it a poem, novel, or essay. You might pay special attention to characterization, to the pace of the plot, or to the symbolism of a work. But what if there is another way? A new practice called distant reading is thus called for. Instead of carefully analyzing a single work, distant reading takes a number of pieces of literature and feeds them into a computer for analysis. This idea is born from the fact that there are simply too many books for anyone to read and study seriously. How could you possibly read through them all to make sure you had the whole picture of what writing was like then? And what about all the other periods of history and all the other places where things were written? It is precisely written in this context that we are confronted with the pressing question about world literature, how to study world literature at the interstices of local, national, and international borders. So, really briefly about these two concepts, close reading and distant reading. Close reading is a technique of reading that we could say that's close to any literary English class, right? You talk about symbols, you talk about main ideas, you talk about character development, right? And also poems, you talk about imagery, right? And this is developed by three people, I.A. Richards, William Ampson, and T.S. Eliot, the very, very famous poet back in 1920s. And they focus on, being immersed in the reading itself, and that's how you approach it. And distant reading is a technique developed by Stanford University professor, Stanford. Franco Moretti. And this guy developed a system of reading saying that there are 200 canons, 200, criteria of looking at world literature. And he said that before 1740, basically mass production of books, number of books weren't that really available. But after that, there was an explosion of books, right? And you can't really differentiate and read everything. I mean, how would you read? I mean, what Victorian novels do you know besides Pride and Prejudice and maybe Wuthering Heights, maybe in Jane Eyre, right? and most people don't even read all three, right? But then there are tons and tons and tons of other great Victorian readings that anyone could read. However, he sees that it's impossible to read all that. So he developed a system where he would literally type in all these books into a computer, and the computer will analyze these writings. Now, computers cannot read, however, read to understand, but it could detect what kind of vocabularies is being used. So computers will say, okay, this is a horror story. It's actually pretty cool that the computer will pick among these 200 canons that Professor Franco Moretti put together, and computer will say, oh, this is a horror novel. Oh, this is a historical novel. And this is a fiction. And then, reread bits and pieces of that. So distant reading, in a sense, could be equivalent to what TOEFL reading is, right? You read for specific ideas, and you read specific part of a different sort of books. And there's another thing called MAP test, which a lot of the international school students have to take before entering. Missouri assessment test. And there, it uses the same technique. They'll pick 2 pages out of The Little Women. And then, although they do talk about imagery and they do talk about basic character things, but I mean, you can't really test a student's reading ability about symbolism and imagery if you're only giving 2 pages out of 150-page book. So, anyway, here, so we once again has an equivalent term. So close reading would be equivalent to microeconomics, and distant reading would be equivalent to macroeconomics. And that's a brief overview of passage C. And let's talk about the question. Based on the passages A, B, and C, write an essay on the following topic. What an ideal world literature study would be like. Okay, so should we focus more on close reading, or should we focus more on distant reading? Now, once again, this is about ideal world literature, right? Not literature of your own language. So in your essay, you must address how the micro and macro divide relates to the 2 distinctive approaches to world literature studies. You must provide your own opinions on the question of what an ideal world literature study would be like. For example, discussing whether you agree or disagree with the close reading or distant reading. So, as I said earlier in this video, Hanyang University care about the quality of your answer, but it also cares, in my opinion, more in terms of your understanding of these passages. So you should be able to tell how microeconomics and macroeconomics in their view differs, but at the same time how literature study through close reading would differ from distant reading. Now, if you were to write an essay on this topic, what would your approach be?
First, I will briefly talk about what is approaching literary work in micro-way or macro-way, so giving them insight, so introduction.
Right.
And in my body paragraph, I will tell, what's the advantage or disadvantage of approaching things in micro or macro way. And lastly, I will mention my thought about approaching works in micro or macro way, and so on and so forth. These examples supports my idea, so I rather approach in micro or macro way.
And
so I'll
what
pick
would you
one.
choose?
I will do micro.
You do micro.
Yeah, I'll do micro.
So you do close.
Yeah, close reading.
Really
Really close reading.
Any reason behind that?
So usually book is a thing that requires long time to analyze it and dissolve or understand, because the author didn't really finish that book in 2 days. He took long time to finish that book to want readers to know, what's this symbol symbolizes, how this symbol works in the plot analysis, how this character develops in the future. Or instead of focusing on how it started and how it ends it, like who won in the battle or who died, it is really important to understand what happened in the middle, why it led to the fight, or why they became betraying each other, or something like that. So if you understand, or if you jump into novel really in close reading, I think it would be more beneficial for you to be more interested or be more,
All right.
Yeah.
My opinion here in this is that I guess the answer is sort of already chosen here. If you look at B, it talks about how people are making immense efforts to sustain efforts to merge microeconomics and macroeconomics together. So it is, in a way, hinting that the way a literature should be taught is that we should look at both ways, not just one. But I think my worldlit education, I remember when I was in English class back in, I think I was in 10th or 11th grade, I read a book titled Things Fall Apart, written by an African author about African society, Okwan Ko, the main character. Now, we did spend a lot of time, before we even started reading, we spent a lot of time about the civil unrests and how African society were like in times of being, in times when the author was writing it. And that really helped a lot to really getting a grasp of what it is. So I do agree, because it's a literature, we should look at it in a micro way.
Yeah.
Another book that I remember reading was Lord of the Flies, and all these William Golding books and George Orwell books. My instructor, my English teacher back then, she spent a lot of time discussing about wars and how people felt during those times. So, it helped a lot in understanding the literature itself. So unless we study it that way, and I don't think we need to read all these books. There's a famous proverb in Taoism saying that if you want to know the contents of this, glass or the pot, right, the kettle, you don't really have to drink it all. You can just taste a single drop of it, and you'll be able to know whether it's water or wine, right? So, if you want to be an expert of literature, you might approach this way. But I would go with more of a micro in my personal view. You also mentioned about Macbeth.
Yeah. So Macbeth. So back in high school, when I was studying Macbeth.
You make it sound so gloomy when I was studying Macbeth.
It was because boring time. Shakespeare works is always boring, but it's really good to read one time. But I won't read it again. But when I was studying for Macbeth in high school, my English teacher mentioned that it is really important to focus on details instead of don't go to Spark Notes or Wikipedia to know your summary, or just is not good because Macbeth is actually a good novel and you should understand what
Good
this
play,
symbolizes.
tragedy
It's
play.
really good play. It's So I think Macbeth in the play of Macbeth, how they made relationship between cruelty and masculinity and there's a symbol that the blood is symbol in the
Right.
play. So blood is everywhere. How they start fighting and all that. So if I just read Spark Notes, I would not really appreciate why Shakespeare symbolizes blood as and how masculinity and cruelty there's a relationship between them. So yeah.
Okay.
So the distant reading won't help in any case.
And distant reading, in a way, takes away the fun out of it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not
So
interesting.
let's look at Avengers.
Oh yeah.
Right, the Infinity War, right? So let's say if you were to read Avengers or summarize Avengers in a macroeconomic or distant reading kind of way, how would you do it?
How they started fighting and what happened at the middle of it. How did they train for it, or why they betrayed, or why is it, how is that guy seems so bad guy but behind it is actually good guy.
Right.
So but if you do distant reading, he's just a bad guy. He kills.
Right.
So
if you do close reading, you get to read about Thanos, why he started to believe it's important to get rid of half the population of the universe because of what happened in Titan, his own planet. And he, the audience gets to learn that he has a heart inside. He's not some merciless, cold-hearted, Titan that kills half of the universe. He actually loved his stepdaughter Gamora dearly, so much so that it pained him so much when he give her away as a sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
And all these things we missed, and I think there's a lot of videos on YouTube that our students can watch. I'm not encouraging you to waste time, but those 2-hour movie and 6-minute review kind of things.
Oh yeah.
They sort of are in a way a macro way of things, macro way of things, right?
Yeah, macro.
Okay. Now, let's get into the essay. So it becomes a custom for us to go over the essay. So we picked 2 essays from the samples. One, we'll call the dilemma of the essay that begins was the dilemma of micro and macro approaches. That would be essay 1. And people study literature in a variety of ways, trying to get an ideal view of the study. We call that essay 2.
Yep.
Right? So among essay 1 and 2, which one did you like?
Oh, I
better?
picked 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any reason why?
So I think my personal opinion about essay is to influence people. You write essay or you write article to make people your own side. So if you really express your opinion, I think it is really better to why I feel this way. And I think essay should include personal feeling of it. So the second essay is you can see this writer really successfully developed the topic of studying modern literature or how the ideal world would be. He or she successfully differentiate between micro and macro. He might be economic major or something. And at the end, he picked one side of micro because this is why, and he successfully influenced me.
Right.
Yeah, so I like this essay better. It's not a list of things. It's just more of a personal thoughts.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Any particular part that you want to point out?
Oh, yeah. So, as you can see, in the very last, knowing the overall characteristics of a certain period of literature is only like looking at the surface of a watermelon. The surface of a watermelon is not the real part of it. By cutting and trying the watermelon, you'll be able to know the real watermelon. So, as the writer said, I believe that the book you don't know the book until you open the cover. So you don't know the book, you don't know the story of the book before just by looking at a page of it.
Or by skimming through
it.
Spark Notes or Cliff Notes.
Yeah, Cliff Notes. Because maybe like one book has a picture of a guy holding a knife and there's one guy doing this, but maybe that might be a play of like musical or something. Yeah. But some people just looking at a cover, you might say, oh, that guy probably is trying to kill that guy B.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I want to make a brief, I guess, add to what you just said. Tom Sawyer. I mean, I'm giving a lot of novel references. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I read it as a kid. I read it as a student. I read it as a teacher. But at each time, I read different versions of it. When I was a kid, I read a concise version of it, which only talks about the fun part of it. And when I was a student, I read almost the actual version. And then only when I became the actual teacher, I started reading the real version, right? And there's a lot more to it every time I read it. I didn't know about Aunt Polly, right? The lady who took in Tom Sawyer, though, she's Anne, she's not the mother of Tom. And, all these backstories and I started to empathize with her. Same thing with, again, the Avengers, right? I remember reading from a critic that the whole scene of how Thanos drops her on the cliff as a sacrifice, that whole scene is the second longest scene in the movie besides the final fight. And knowing that the movie makers had spent that much time, they must have known and wanted the audience to really experience the pain that Thanos go through.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Thanos would not be such a great villain. He's powerful and strong. He's a powerful villain, but then he also has a heart again. And that could only be felt if you took a close reading approach.
Close reading, yeah.
Now, about Essay 1, though, I want to make sure our students know that we, neither of us are saying Essay 1 is bad. I actually think Essay 1 is great in terms of fitting in to what Hanyang University is looking for. So I will say this. If a student, if you, for instance, are preparing for Hanyang University, but at the same time preparing for, Korea University or Yonsei University, prepare for both. Because Essay 2 gives you, or it will show you a good way of developing your own ideas. Right?
Yeah.
And influencing the reader, or if you're doing Yonsei University, to your interviewer. But then Hanyang Universities, if you're applying only to Hanyang University, pay close attention to 1 because this really fits what the university professors are looking for. So it's a list of items, but then because it's a list of items, it makes it easy for professors to know that the student understood the passages and the student is giving the right answer. So Essay 1 is the essay that professors will easily give good marks to. Essay 2 is an essay where the professors will be impressed about and equally will give good points, but not as quickly as 1. I'm not saying 2 is worse than 1 or anything like that. They're both great essays, but in a traditional standpoint of what a good essay is, 2 should be considered the better one.
Yeah.
However, this is a college essay specifically designed for students to say specific things, and because Hanyang University spends so much effort to let the students know that this is what they're looking for, students should, if Hanyang University is your best choice, your ideal choice, you should study what this essay look like. And, possibly try to design your essay this way too. Anyway, I think this concludes our video. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Good luck, guys.